I don't know what happened there. This might be a disaster. Welcome to the at the end of the fucking internet. I'm garethcmckay. Today we're going to be talking about the conspiracy against the human race. Before and after reading it, hopefully, is the idea. A constant occurrence. I hope not, but we'll deal with it the best we can. And if it proves too problematic, I guess we'll have to abandon ship. I'm not sure. But joining me today on life after reading this particular book, but well, you both, James and myself, have read it numerous times. I'm not sure when you first read it, James. It was the year True Detective came out, because I remember watching that show, and it doesn't happen to me normally, but I was watching Russ Cole give his monologues and speeches and whatnot, and I just thought I need to know who wrote this. So once I discovered that it was Nick Pizzolatto, I kind of did some research, and the conspiracy against the human race was the one that kept cropping up. The other was Benatar's Better Never to Have Been, but for some reason conspiracy stuck out to me more, probably because of the title and maybe some of the feedback I read about it and things like that. So that's what prompted me to get the book, and I would say it was a great comfort to me, actually, the first few times I read it, but that might have been to do with my own disposition and outlook on the world and what I was looking for from it. Mainly because, yeah, anyone who's seen True Detective will probably know why. Probably a lot to do with the anti-natalist themes, I suppose, but also probably the pessimism and things like that. That's what really drew me to it. And at the moment we've lost James, so can you guys hear me all right?
Yeah, now I can.
Good. This might be
Dropping like flies here.
yeah, exactly. I'm running it as the lowest kind of bit rate that I can, and it's having issues, so that might sort itself out. I really don't know at this minute. But yeah, I don't. To answer whether it's improved my life, if that's the question, or if it's how have I found existing since reading it. Difficult one. I mean, in some ways, I think it's been a great benefit. But there is another side of me that thinks maybe I would have been better off never having read it. I'm not sure. I don't think it is the latter, but there is a part of me that thinks, is it a good thing having your suspicions about existence validated? Because that's what it felt like to me, especially the first time reading it. I was a bit like that DiCaprio meme where he's constantly pointing. I was just pointing at different passages going, oh my god, yeah, and this kind of thing. And for that reason, I found it very reassuring almost. Like he said in an interview, I think you mentioned in your review, James, about the fact that it's a self-help book, which kind of sounds pretty controversial in a way, but in a sense I kind of view it as the only self-help book, because it doesn't give you any bullshit, essentially. And yeah, but Paula and Bruno have just read it for the first time, so what are your thoughts?
You want to go first, Paula? Can you hear me?
You go, Bruno.
Hello?
I'm not sure this is working, but
All right.
Hey, sorry, I just kind of. Hello.
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 I don't know what's happened.
So, well,
Okay,
so
well,
I
I
guess,
think it's funny. You just read the book for the first time, didn't you, Bruno?
yes, last week, actually. I got the second edition. Yeah, I have to say I love the new cover. And the first one was a
Nice
bit
cover.
dull. This one, like, it really pops out when you see the kind of baby or whatever smoking and with his face like swollen and all that. I think it's really eye-catching. So an improvement in the second edition. I don't know if there are any changes actually, but overall, I think as GC said, uh, it's pretty much like a Pandora's box that you open after reading it. Because if you have like a pessimistic inclination, it really confirms all of your deepest fears in a way. It really puts in a logical and kind of hard to argue against view of the world as a bad idea to exist, really. Uh, and conscience being the initial or the biggest blunder of existence, right? So I found it in a way not really like putting you down, but just being really honest. I think it's the most honest book I've ever read because it doesn't pull any punches. It really just goes all out. Doesn't have any sort of uh, any sort of bullshit. It doesn't say like if you work three times more, or if you wake up early, or if you seek the love of your life, that all your problems will go away. It just like lays it all bare. So
It's
I don't know
interesting.
if it's
It's interesting you say that because Pizzolatto, the guy who wrote True Detective, he said when he
yeah,
read this, it's a kind of, I'm paraphrasing it a bit, but he basically said he didn't really read it as a well, self-help book or even book on philosophy. It was more like a confession. He felt like he was reading an author's darkest kind of inclinations and suspicions regarding life, and I could definitely see that actually,
yeah.
especially like the more he goes on like tangents and just I
Yeah, I
think
think that's the best part of the book, really. The tangents, the different ways he kind of uh, find to express his feelings in different contexts, be it books or films or even uh, real world accounts of other people. So it really paints a broad picture of life and how grim it can be.
yeah,
Don't know
I
if
find, I don't know, maybe
if
I'm
you
the only
agree with
one, but
that.
I always find it quite funny for some reason. I just
No,
when he
I
starts
found it really funny, really
uh,
funny.
when he
The
starts
whole bit with the
comparing things,
crash, the
yeah,
car
vehicular
accident,
misadventures and stuff like that,
yeah,
and then
vehicular
so
misadventure.
he keeps comparing it to like a toilet bowl. It's like it'll put up something of a really hierarchical kind of order, and then reduce it down to feces or something, and basically say it's
Yeah,
the same thing. And yeah, this read around actually, I did really pick up on the language, and especially the way he kind of draws you in. It's actually a slightly religious way of doing it, where he'll kind of give a proposition and then halfway through a paragraph or certain section, it kind of revert back, and he uses this way of repeating certain passages or turns of phrase as to kind of win you over to his argument. So you kind of like find yourself nodding along, and it's got a very hypnotic way of expressing itself, if not slightly manipulative, because there's some moments where he was kind of saying, we're only going to be using this for this tiny bit of an argument that I want to bring across, but never mind. And then it'll just dissect a certain way of thinking or whatever, and then kind of talk to you as if you already agree with him. And yeah, it's very convincing for sure. And I do think it is more fun than probably the average person would view it as.
I don't want to say I didn't have fun reading it, but the whole bit with the suicide being the only way, the only honorable way out of life, that bit was kind of hard. That especially I thought was, well, that's pretty grim. But as you said, it's pretty funny. He has a real grasp in the dark humor of it all, of life.
Genius phrasing as well. That's what I'm remembered most of the book. It's a great phrasing. I mean, that malignantly useless is just a great way of wording it, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, before I read that, I was aware that there was no point to life, but just that phrasing, malignantly useless. And
I love the whole Messiah on a stick
as well.
Yeah. I love the way he uses the word blunder as well. Nature's biggest blunder. I feel like nature's made this huge mistake in a factory when it was making humans or something. Made a big blunder with consciousness.
Consciousness, parent of all horrors. Kind of would put between M dashes as well quite a lot of the time.
The book is full of those good phrases, I think. He's got quite a good writing style, quite a vocabulary, and there is a certain tone to the book, though, that kind of gives you the impression you're not allowed to disagree with it. I've kind of picked up on that, especially the third time around. It's kind of, you feel as though you haven't got an option to disagree. You feel, when you read it, you feel as though any views that are in opposition to his, they must be ridiculous. They must be untrue, because this book is the truth, and you can't argue with it. Did anybody kind of pick up on that?
Yeah, for me, it was definitely the language that had me hooked. Because I heard so much about this book, and I was actually terrified to pick it up and read it. That's why I think I waited almost a year or two. And then after reading it, I actually thought, I've read way worse. But just to comment on Ligotti first, I was mesmerized by the language for sure. And I like the portrayal and approach of his portrayal of the world, and the way he defines the uncanny. And it has actually helped me view things from different angles as well, from a philosophical perspective. And I did find it funny and entertaining as well in some ways. Just how he was humming the song of suicide and throughout the book. And then he was like kind of losing his marbles towards the end. The last few pages, I was like, what's going on there right now? But yeah, I like, one thing I really like is just that he touches upon the philosophies that I'm interested in, like existentialism, pessimism, and like almost like 50 pages in, I was like, when is he going to mention this and that philosopher, for example? Emil, I don't know if you know Emil Cioran, a Romanian one. It took him like halfway through the book to bring him up. And that guy is by far the most radical philosopher that I've ever read. Like he's a big time nihilist, cynic, and I think he was even a former fascist. And I think in one of the videos that you did, James, you mentioned that Ligotti had fascistic tone or something, and I didn't even notice that, to be honest. But with Choran, we know that he used to be a fascist, and even when he stepped away from it, he never apologized for it. But there's this book called A Short History of Decay, which is like about the decline of humanity into decadence. That's an interesting read. It's just, even like the first few pages when you read that book, it's like a spit in your face. But I remember at the time when I was reading that, I found it quite soothing at the time. And he calls human beings many things. And I think Ligotti quoted one thing by Choran. I think he referred to human beings as animated matter, I think. And that is nicely put compared to what he actually wrote in A Short History of Decay, which I highly recommend. He calls man vertical carry-ons, which I think is really, really harsh. And that's why after having read that and then reading Conspiracy, I actually find Conspiracy rather tactful in many ways. So yeah, I don't know.
That's an interesting take. I first read this book in 2020, and I was actually in a good place in life. I was happy. I just got a new job, just started a new life, kind of thing, and I can't remember how I first found it. I just went down some kind of rabbit hole. I often look for disturbing books to read. I'm into horror and stuff. So I just came across it, and I didn't find it humorous at all. It didn't have that effect on me. I found it quite disturbing, and shortly after that, the whole COVID thing kicked off, and I then had some kind of relationship breakup. So it all kind of went wrong after reading the book. So it did have a big effect on me.
Yeah, that's the thing. Certain time,
Yeah.
It's a time and a place kind of thing, I think, with this book. Because when I found it, I was working in a crappy warehouse job, pretty depressed. Things weren't going right. And I don't think it's, for your average person, maybe that wouldn't be a good time to read it. But when I came to it, I was just like, this is a massive comfort in a way, because the points he kind of hits upon, the way he kind of brings up different mediums as well and different books, and you get this whole springboard of other literature to check out and philosophers and things like that. And I don't know, I think I always found it kind of amusing, but probably in that gallows humor, maybe even madness type of almost like, sometimes when I read Poe, I can find it amusing because the guy's so fucking mental, and when you're watching him descend into madness, there's a certain element of like hilarity to that, because it's just, maybe it's because it's relatable, I'm not sure, but I think as Paula said, the longer you go on reading it, there's certain passages where he starts going on about believing in Christ, and then like a Frankensteinian monster patched together through history, and so it's basically Frankenstein's monster in reference to religion and stuff like that, and how he kind of
on a stick.
Savior on a stick. Doug Stanhope made the same joke as well, funnily enough. He's a stand-up comedian, your savior on a stick kind of thing, and he was doing all of that. And there's this other passage that always pops out to me when he suddenly starts playing devil's advocate, and he starts saying to you, like, oh, if you're not on board with this, fuck off, kind of thing. we don't need you and your pessimistic outlook and all this kind of stuff. We've got our booze and our, you know, sports channels and all this kind of stuff. So he starts reversing it almost, and it kind of goes into second person, I think, as well. It's madness pretty much. And yeah, I mean, I've read his fiction as well, or some of his fiction, and that humor isn't really there so much. It is a little bit here in places, but no way as much, I don't think. But I don't know, maybe he's just being 100% genuine when he says, like, we should, if we ever get off this planet, we should aim to blow up Earth as quickly as possible and things like that. And it's just like, I think he actually probably does mean that overall. And I can kind of see his argument, you know, in terms of like how nature recycles itself and kind of feeds upon itself to exist, and there is this kind of Ouroboros element to existence and things like that. I think the only thing for me is finding how you can use it in a good way. That could be somewhere where you kind of come up or stumble blocks, because it's difficult. I think watching it or watching True Detective alongside it, you kind of look at Russ Cole, and his way of being is very admirable. He is like an Ubermensch, essentially. Like, if I'm not sure anyone's said that of him, but maybe, you know, if you ignore the ending a bit. But in terms of knowing yourself and of knowing your outlook on the world and having this kind of shield against being influenced by others and things like that, I mean, I suppose there would be an element of intransigence to your character and stubbornness, which probably is in the book as well, in terms of how he portrays his argument. And it's almost like, if you disagree with me, then you can just stop fucking reading it, kind of thing. It's like, I'm not bothered. And for me, it is strengthening that, my pessimism, essentially, is what I hope it kind of does. I'm not sure it always works, because I think in general we always fall into delusion. That's the only thing. It's like, that's probably why I go back to it so frequently, really, because it's very easy to get lost in the pretensions of our minds, basically, and how we're, like the opening quote says, like, look at your body, a weak and useless thing full of false imaginings and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, I just feel like these kind of things are like a toolkit. He does mention like Schopenhauer, and I love the fact that he roasts Nietzsche. He basically attacks Friedrich Nietzsche of all people. So I just kind of like, yeah, he's got balls. I'll give him that as well, because he doesn't give a shit who he's like attacking. I think even Albert Camus gets slightly attacked as well. Does he attack Camus?
Yeah, he does a little bit. He makes fun of his like death, because he died in a car crash, right? So that's why I think he keeps mentioning the vehicular misadventure. I don't like that. I just started driving again, so it wasn't something I wanted to read. But yeah, he does roast Camus and Nietzsche. I find it's mainly because they offer what you call like solutions to the human condition, right? So. And that's why he's probably more partial to Schopenhauer, because Schopenhauer doesn't offer you shit. So yeah, that's why they're both on the same boat.
I love that, because it's the ultimate rejection. He rejected God, then he rejected Nietzsche. So there's no way to run, basically. Because people say, oh, I don't believe in God. But ask them about Nietzsche. Nietzsche is basically the new God, really. So that double rejection, I think it really encapsulates the whole thesis, right? There's no way you can run. If you think you found some meaning in life, it's basically just another delusion. So going back to the Peter Zapp thing with the 4 major distractions, or I don't remember how he exactly
Oh,
phrase
yeah.
it.
Yeah, the whole delusion thing I thought was interesting, but he just likes using the negative words for it, like self-denial, self-deception, and all that.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a bit where he talks about, well, he refers to self-deception as a form of useful fiction, or I think it was positive illusions or something. And then he also calls it paradoxical because when you know something like life is all about suffering, you just can't pretend that you don't know it. And but the thing is, you can, because the human mind is wired that way. You have the conscious versus the unconscious mind. And I forgot who quoted that in the book, but I agree with it. I mean, this doesn't mean that you should repress these thoughts and emotions. You just need ways to channel them. So going back to useful fictions, I think Ligotti describes how supernatural horror allows you to live your double lives and stuff. But I think other genres provide you with the same opportunity as well. And that's why all fiction writers write fiction, because they want to create alter egos to unload excess weight from their subconscious. And yeah, I couldn't cope without creating a double self on paper, and that's why you were mentioning Peter Saff, and I actually like that principle. The fourth one, what's it called? Sublimation.
Yeah, sublimation. It's basically Nietzsche's concept as well.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so it's like the notion of giving aesthetic value to life, like using art as a positive outlet and stuff. And yeah, that's, as you said, that's the closest thing what Nietzsche or Camus even would say. Just finding solutions to cope with the human condition. And yeah, this whole idea of creating meaning through art. Actually, I think I have one.
There is. I mean, they have it. He kind of puts it down to isolation, anchoring, distraction, or sublimation. There's a psychology professor, Sam Vaknin, and he kind of talks about similar coping mechanisms people adopt, but he kind of brings it down to three. It's basically you're either psychotic, like you believe in God or religion, or you basically place an importance on the external as being more important than you, but it's a projection, so it's basically psychopathy. You're deluded beyond repair. Or you're a narcissist, so everything relates back to you, and you are the center of the universe, and everything outside of it doesn't exist unless you've seen it or experienced it or whatever. And then you've got nothing.
Solipsistic.
Yeah, it's very the solipsistic to the very definition, I would imagine. But I kind of wonder why he leaves out sublimation. But then I kind of think surely sublimation then is a combination of psychopathy and narcissism. I mean, you can't create without having a tinge of narcissism in your personality, because you're basically saying, I'm going to create this world, quote unquote. I'm going to bring something into existence that is an extension of me. So it's your God, but you're putting it out into the world, or at least that's the aim in the end of it. So maybe that's why Vaknin doesn't mention that, but I would say that is definitely a blend of the first two, where there's an element of madness to wanting to create anyway, but there always has to be a godlike element to it as well. I mean, we can't get away from that. We idolize people for kicking a ball. We make gods out of them, essentially. We can't. We never. And the reason self-help books in general sell is because they're flogging hope, essentially. They're dishing it out, like the way people used to pay for indulgences, and that's just to get a priest to go, oh, never mind that your brother was a rapist or whatever. We'll just bless you here, and he'll get into heaven. That kind of thing. People used to pay for that, pay for thin air, essentially. That's how far it can go. And yeah, nothingness is one that interests me the most, because I think it's basically you're trying to realize that you are nothing, that life is nothing, and that you're trying to. It's similar to how it mentions the ego death. I think about a quarter of the way through the book, maybe a four-fifths.
I think that's towards. Yeah, I think that's towards the end, isn't it? I remember that part. Ego.
Yeah. And it's a part of the book that I kind of wish he would expand on a bit, or at least look at it from a different angle other than brain damage, because I don't, whether it's approachable. I mean, I think in Judaism, nothingness pops up quite a bit in terms of, and there are Eastern religions that mention it here and there. Obviously, Buddhism, and I like the fact that he mentioned how pessimistic Buddhism is, because I hadn't seen that before. But yeah, in terms of the day to day, like how you exist, and you can't really put a book like this into your way of looking at the world and have it stick. I don't think, because not only would you be insufferable to be around, because you'd be like, bullshit, everything's fake, everything's made up, and all this kind of stuff. But in general, like I'm not sure you could function that much. You probably just go insane, like Nietzsche. I'm surprised you didn't roast him for that a bit more in a way, because it's a good thing to try and adhere to and aspire to potentially, but in the long run, I don't know whether it's achievable, to be honest. Because, as Camus said, I mean, it's like, would you not just come to the conclusion that suicide's the best and only option? And I don't think it is, because
I think it could be used as kind of an anchor point, that if you're too distracted or too caught up in basically bullshit like career, money, country, football, or whatever, you can look back at the book and realize again that nothing really matters. And if you look at other people, like in Instagram or something, that's basically like the realm of flux and whatever. You can look at that and say, well, these people, they don't matter. Like me, I don't matter, but at least I know I know that it's all bullshit. And if you get too caught up, sometimes you can forget about that and get too focused on a career path, or if your team has lost or won or whatever. So I think that in that way it can be a self-help book, in being kind of bringing you back to the naked reality of the meaningless of it all. I don't know, but that's the way I kind of see it.
Yeah, I mean, actually, since you mentioned it, do you want to go?
Yeah. I think the book works as a self-help book in only one way. I think it gives you a sense of company. I think it lets you know that you're not the only person in the world who has these books, and you're not the only pessimist in the world. And it gives you a sense of comfort and company like that. But what it doesn't give you is guidance. When you turn the last page, you're left thinking, what do I do now? Where do I go from here? It doesn't give you any kind of guidance after the last page. It just lets you know you're not on your own. I think that's how I found it as a self-help book the third time around. And
I just find it so.
Yeah.
Sorry, you keep going.
I was just going to say, it doesn't really touch upon stoicism either, I've noticed. Because it's one way of dealing with the kind of meaninglessness, in my opinion, is you can actually turn the meaninglessness into your meaning. If you acknowledge the fact that life is hard and every day you're going to face challenges, you can kind of turn those challenges into your meaning. You can think, right, I'm gonna deal with these challenges as best I can. I'm gonna kind of march through life, and that is my meaning. but it doesn't really touch upon that in the book. I found. Did anybody else notice that?
Yeah, there are some omissions in the book that I noticed. One being that, the other being, as UC was saying, the ego death. He doesn't mention anything about drugs. I found it a little bit weird because everyone's saying, "Oh, DMT or whatever, LSD can give you some kind of like ego death." And but the stoicism thing, I think, is a really good point because it's like playing your role, playing the cards you've been dealt, and just feeling it, the just existing basically, like not putting judgment. I think it's some way of looking at it. Because one point that I found that I was lacking was he kind of starts at the point that life's not worth living at all. And I don't know if I agree with that. Because he said, "Oh, you know you're gonna die, so what's the point? So why live at all?" Or I think there's more to it. If you like ask someone who's lived like 90 or whatever, says, "Is it worth it? Was it worth it living that long?" I think probably like most people would say yes. They had difficulties like everyone else, but overall, at the end, they found that probably it's worth living. I mean, all of us probably had to go through some tough times in our lives, but I don't think we can reduce that to say that the experiment of living is overall bad or it wasn't worth it. At least I don't think so.
Yeah, this kind of reminds
some
me.
people would put that down to the Pollyanna principle. By the way, in David Benatar's book, he talks about the Pollyanna principle. People tend to look back on their pasts through rose-tinted spectacles. So that 90-year-old person would probably say, yes, life has been good, because they would forget about the bad times and remember the good times only.
Well, your brain actually does that as well. Because
but
when you recall something,
isn't that means that it's worth it? Like, even though you're looking at with rose-tinted glasses or whatever, doesn't it mean that after those bad points,
the thing is, though, I don't think you can relate to it outside of, because we seem to split it like between non-existence and existence, but you can only dwell on non-existence as you're existing. You can't do it the reverse. So I kind of feel like it's a mistake to do it, because it's like what does it even mean to ask the question, was life worth living? Compared to what? Like, I didn't know what it was before I was alive, and I'm not going to know afterwards. So it's like a redundant question almost to me. It's kind of mute. The point of it is pointless, essentially. It's like, compared to what? I don't know. I mean, if I go on to live another life where I'm the only guy on an island full of young women or whatever, great. But I don't have this bullshit. That's fucking Islam fantasy, that is. But yeah, it's like I don't have any like, to what's the comparison? I don't know. Like, I don't think it's a valid
puts
question.
Out that in a way that is like it's better to not have existed, so you're kind of comparing it to non-existence in a way. He says like, "Oh, I'm alive now, so that's what was a terrible mistake." But in a way, you're comparing, as you said, you don't have any frame of reference of non-existing. So I don't know if existing can't be bad if non-existence is not even on the same scale. It's not even on bad or good.
Yeah.
Because it's a mute point.
Or is it the same
It's
thing?
not.
That's
Yeah,
one thing I'd consider.
it's kind of what Eugene says in the Dust of This Planet, that we kind of look at things through the world, in our perspective, in the human view of the world for us, as he
Yeah.
said, not the world in itself, because reality is much greater and much weirder and deeper than we can fathom. So I don't think that comparing to non-existence is relevant in a way. I don't know what you guys think. But
Well, what about existing as an animal? Maybe is it worth existing as a cat or a dog or any other animal apart from a human?
yeah, this is kind of like another point that I don't fully agree with the book. When he says that humans are completely different from nature, I think we having conscience, of course, we're distant from nature. We are, as he says, like kind of uncanny creatures walking about. But at the same time, I think we don't really recognize that nature kind of influences us in various ways, more than we like to admit. I read somewhere that microscopes in your stomach and intestines, they can affect your mood, and we're not like one continuous and unified being. We're kind of made up of different chemical reactions in different organisms, and as the Greek says, the humors that affect our mental states too. So seeing ourselves as completely devoid of nature, completely apart from it, I don't think is really.
Valid.
Yeah, it's valid. I don't think it's valid. As he puts, like he said that the consciousness, it cuts off our relationship with nature. I don't think that's quite true. But I don't know what it's like to be a cat, or what it's like to be a dog. Some scientists or whatever, they think that can't be like what it's like to be in a glass of water, or what it's like to be a piece of machinery, or a computer. Now with the whole artificial intelligence thing, like, can you be a neural network? Does the neural network that processes images and sounds, do they have a consciousness, or can it feels like, does it feel something, or is there a way to be like that? I think those are things that are kind of out of our perception and understanding of the world.
Well, it's funny you mentioned machinery because a big theme in the book is puppets. He likens us to puppets, and one of the reasons he gives is that instead of being unitary, human beings are actually made up of many different parts working together. And in that sense, he says, how can we have free will when we're composed of many working parts? We're controlled by our genes, of course. A good example of the gene thing is the fact that we have a sex drive. The reason we've got a desire to go and have sex and procreate and stuff, but most people like to think that it's their decision, but really it's the fact that our DNA wants us on to the next generation, and we're kind of the vehicles to pass on that DNA. So, does anybody agree that we are puppets, or do you feel as though you have free will?
I like to link this idea to determinism, because I believe that, well, we are tied to nature, and it's hard to believe that past events don't have an influence on the future, especially when you think that history repeats itself. And there's always a reason for people to repeat the same mistakes like over and over again, just probably in a different fashion. But yeah, unfortunately, that's a very human thing to do. And not just that, I find that time and events repeat themselves too. And but it's like an infinite loop, right? So some kind of uncontrollable pattern, I don't know, but that's how I view determinism. So it does control us like puppets, yet I don't want to call myself a determinist, because I do think that random things happen in life. But if you refer it back to the whole free will thing, I don't know what I really feel about it. I always found it a bit illusory, but you would want to ask yourself, like, are we held accountable for our actions at all?
Right, that's the big argument. It's
Yeah,
interesting that we don't actually
if you're caught, you
shoot our
could
own
be.
fault.
Well, I think we're responsible for our actions. We're responsible for our actions because there is a choice, unless you think the choice itself is an illusion as well. So, yeah.
Well, if you go to more into about genes, I mean, some people have got off from murdering because there's actually some sort of genetic makeup in them that made them go berserk and things like that. So, how much free will is there? But if you have a particular, I don't know, it's like a very specific gene. I think the guy who went on top of some tower and started like massacring people and stuff like that, and before that he was just your standard citizen kind of thing. But he felt like something just snapped in him, kind of. So yeah, I mean, there you'd go, well, that's deterministic, surely, because no one would choose to have that. Or maybe they would, I don't know, if they actually fancied killing but didn't have, you know, the gumption to do it or whatever. I mean, the free will thing almost seems as a slightly redundant point as well, because, I mean, it's like what he says in the book, actually. It's like you're free to choose whatever you want in this life, except for one thing. You can't choose any of the choices you'll make. And yeah, that's the position I kind of take with it. I think you have a limited sense of it. You have a semblance of what is free will, and that's maybe enough. I mean, if you had total free will, you'd probably just go berserk, I would have thought. I mean, it doesn't even make sense as a question, does it? Because that assumes all knowledge of everything past, present and future, in a sense. It's godlike, again. It points to a deific kind of element of like having total will. What if my free will determines that I should have been born 100 years ago or whatever, or should be a different sex or whatever? It's like there's not much will there then, is there? It's not like you can shape shift and all that kind of stuff. I think you can get a little bit more of it if you apply yourself. I don't know, I don't even know what that means though. It sounds like a kind of joke. It's like, yeah, you can expand your knowledge somewhat, but it doesn't actually change much in terms of your position and who you are and your upbringing and things like that, which you can't do anything about. I think he even roasts that whole quote about those who forget the past are doomed to repeat it, and he's like, I think it might be in the notes, but Ligotti actually rips the piss out of that, because he's like, well, that's how human beings work. They just do the same shit over and over again, and just keep. And we do, really, because the human being as an animal doesn't really change. It doesn't matter about the economic differences or the technological advancements. Like our drive is very often towards the delusional, I would say, overall. Even like the way we grasp things, we have to reduce it down into very bite-sized chunks of things like language, of little things like, oh, we know what money is. No other species knows what the fuck money is. We've just made it up. It doesn't exist, really. Much like a lot of things we hold in high regard or of importance and whatnot. We're a make-believe species, really. And nothing will change that unless we put chips in our brains and then reduce the biological imperative down to the very as minimal as possible. As again, Ligotti says something about people will compliment the taste of the food, but not the biological impulse that makes them hungry in the first place. It's not like, oh, I'm grateful to be hungry at this moment. No one's going to go, what a great design that is. I love this feeling of needing to be nourished and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So a lot of those things take away the whole question of free will. You don't choose to want to be fucking hungry, do you? Or to want to fuck, or to even just need physical touch when you're a baby. Because if you don't get any physical comfort, you die. So
you don't choose your thoughts either. I mean,
No,
when
you
you're
don't choose
when you're
your thoughts.
speaking now, when I speak, the thoughts, the words pop into my head. I don't consciously choose them. I'm not stopping right now thinking, right, I'll say this word and then this word and then this word. The words are kind of popping into my head. So in a way, you know, it's a subconscious thing. And it's interesting to note that you can't actually locate consciousness in the human brain. If you could, some scientists once said, if you could shrink yourself down to so you're about a millimetre tall, and you walked around somebody's brain, around through the sections, there's no section where you would see consciousness. You can't actually locate it. You can locate the different areas that do this or that, but you can't actually see consciousness. So,
do you think we
there is a
overrate
theory
the concept of it? We've got a kind of weird, because we make it this thing like like we all have it as human beings. We all have consciousness, this very elusive type of thing, which is like, I don't really know what that means. You can't define it, can you?
I remember there was a time, Gareth, you didn't even believe it existed.
Well, yeah, I think I'm back to that point.
Okay.
It's like,
Yeah,
that's what I'm asking. Does it exist it doesn't exist as an entity, or does it? Maybe it is an entity.
I actually find that Joseph Conrad defined it in the best way. Like he says that we're victims of nature, and the fact that we're conscious of it defines our level of consciousness, and that it is some form of a tragedy. It's why we consider ourselves superior to nature or whatever, because we created value systems and that separates us from nature, sort of. And well, it kind of makes sense because we build hierarchies, political parties, and royal families and whatnot, and it's all because we're obsessed with control, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that, the very hubris that we have to call that a value system when we literally place certain people at the top and they're deigned to be superior because of a fucking bloodline or whatever. It's like, it's laughable. That's not a value system. That's basically what nature is. It's like big fish eat the little one kind of thing. It's like animals eat each other kind of thing, and we're all animals. So the only real value in nature is eat or be eaten. Essentially, that's like the main, or at least it seems to be the motto. I mean, we are somewhat outside of that, of course, but how much so? I'd have to really question. Even the whole part where it talks about we're the only animal that has any concept of death, That's not true. Elephants do, because they actually visit and mourn their, well, dead relatives. Obviously, I don't think they have an idea of what it is, but they're aware of when one of them is gone. There was one, I think, in a Yuval Noah Harari book where he mentions how there was these two elephants who were like best friends and all that, and then these ivory snatchers grabbed one of them and killed it and stuff, and this one was like severely depressed for years, just kind of moping around, knowing that his or her friend, if you want to call it that, was gone essentially. And whilst if you went in, you know, if you were gunning down elephants in a herd or whatever, they probably just stand there still drinking from the fountain pool or whatever, because they wouldn't know what was happening, but they're still aware when one of them is missing, let's say. And there are other animals as well that they have a general idea of what it is. But like even with a cat, if you start putting your luggage out or whatever, it knows you're going. And obviously this isn't to do with death necessarily, but it knows that you're going to disappear, so it's going to piss on your stuff. So there's a general concept.
I think it's safe to say there are different levels of consciousness. There's not just on or off. There are different levels to it.
That's very Dostoevskian, potentially.
Well, you mentioned Yuval Noah Harari. Have you read Homo Deus before?
Mm-hmm.
He mentions in that book that the leading theory among neuroscientists today regarding consciousness is that it's actually a byproduct. It's just like if you've got so many neurons and synapses working together in a brain, so much electrical activity, the lights just come on. You know, it's like a byproduct. And in that sense, that kind of does tie into the puppet theory, because
it does.
It implies that most of our thoughts and brain activity is subconscious, and our conscious cells are just like the tip, tiny little tip on the iceberg. That's what it says to me.
Yeah, I think the whole puppet thing is basically a given, really, because everything else in the universe is predetermined, basically. If you start billiards and hit with the same angle, the same force, everything, the balls will move in a set pattern. They wouldn't go like randomly. Every time you hit them with the same force, the same angle, they would.
Would they not?
They always
Does
follow.
it not depend? I mean, I know what you're saying, yeah, in theory, but if you're actually in, say, a pub or a bar, and you've got them set out the exact same way, the heat of the room is going to be different. Even the heat that you're hitting the cue with and things like that, you're like your own body heat, that will have it might be very minuscule, but it will have an effect that will change.
Yeah, but if you
what is this
replicate
theory?
everything,
the chaos theory I'm talking about. I can't remember. I think it's something like that.
And how many beers you've drunk as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, but if you imagine you set the things in motion and you compare both of them, like everything, literally everything is the same. There can only be one result. You can't change it. There's no way to input new information or new things in that system. So that system will always have the same result in the end. So if we think ourselves as being like systems with variables, like I can move my fingers in ways, so everything's predetermined basically, because we can't influence the system we're on, can we? Like, if we think ourselves as a black box, there is no way we can retroactively feed ourselves in that manner. So, but internally, that's that is a point that he puts out in the book. Internally, we see ourselves as having like free will, not a complete free will, but free as in I can type anything I want in this keyboard. There's no way to restrict me. There's nothing like I can type cat or dog or parrot or whatever. But as looking outside, if you look at it in every single possibility, that's kind of predetermined. If everything else would be the same, I would type the same thing in every instance, basically. That looking outside, there is no free will, but looking inside, we have the illusion of free will, basically. That's how I view it. I don't know if it was clear or anything, but thinking like in a physics kind of way, that's basically how I view it. I think it was a bit like convoluted of an explanation, but
no, not at all.
What do you guys think of the concept of having a self? Like, is the self, does it exist? Is it an illusion?
Illusion.
Yeah.
Well, it's more like the whole Deckard thing, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. But what's the I? I don't know. Really, I kind of think that is that surely not just as delusional as not thinking there's any self, kind of thing.
Yeah, that's why I was really interested in the whole thing about Buddhism, because he brought it up so often. Because in Buddhism, you do not believe in a self because we change all the time. You just get a sense of the self that is like connected to the functions of the nervous system or whatever, the brain, because but the thing with the brain is it also conjures up illusions. So but what was I going to say about
it is
so
interesting how it remains that kind of core concept or whatever it is of having this self that you've had since 5 years old, near enough, maybe even before that, maybe even in the womb. But it seems as you get older, you still have this idea of like, oh yeah, this is me, and yet I look in the mirror now and I look totally fucking different to what this supposed self looked like 20-30 years ago. But it is intriguing that kind of core soul, if you want to call it that, sticks around, even if it is totally delusional.
Right. Some people would argue that it's your data within the brain that constitutes you. It's not, you're not your body, because your body changes. Every 7 years your cells completely renew themselves. You're not your brain, you're not your physical brain. Some people would argue that your memories, your data, your kind of the data within the brain, that's where you are, because that's the one thing that remains.
That's one thing I was surprised in the book that he doesn't mention, actually, because your memories are kind of all bullshit as well. I mean, narratively speaking, the brain, it papers over the cracks, essentially, so it will remember things in a very different manner to how they actually went down. And yet,
Pollyanna principle,
yeah. Maybe that's probably a blessing, though, because I think if you remembered things accurately, you'd top yourself in no time. Like,
it's a survival mechanism, I think.
Yeah, this is pretty close to to Total Recall, the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie in the book.
Yeah, you can't.
We're
Holiday.
dying
Yeah.
and rebirthing all the time, because when I think about some friends I haven't seen in a while, I always remember that they're not the same as I met them when I met them when I was in 5th grade or whatever. They were someone else completely different than they are right now. They're not the same person. The experiences of life and everything that came after changes them in such a fundamental level that that person that was my friend back then, that person is no longer, and I am no longer that person as well. So this kind of viewing yourself is not as a fixed thing, as a building or as a tree, but as a kind of a river. The concept that you never bathe in the same river twice, because
Right.
of the flow of the water, it's always changing. I think people are kind of like that, or even our day-to-day experience is kind of like that.
Yeah, that's why I lean towards Buddhism, I think, but I am not a Buddhist. I do not believe in reincarnation, and I no longer believe in karma, but I do borrow Buddhist meditation techniques, to manage stress and anxiety, but not to get enlightened. And whether Ligotti debunked Buddhism or not in the book, I think you mentioned it in one of your videos, James. I still think that he's partial to Buddhism, because he even used the Buddhist quote in his epilogue. But yeah, other than that, I think that modern Buddhists have it all wrong anyway. They actually pray to Buddha and the enlightened ones like they were gods. They do not meditate, and they don't even understand the concept of nothingness and impermanence. The idea of accepting impermanence is a huge factor in meditation, and it just means that you accept the law of nature, the fact that nothing is constant, and Buddhism is supposed to be like so simple. Like when you talk about the flow of water, that's as simple as it gets. Like it gets so simple, it's silly. There's this Vietnamese monk that I've read a few books of his. I think he died not long ago. His name is Thich Nhat Hanh. His books, I thought I liked it until I realized, man, this is like reading a kid's book, because he tries to define happiness, and then he tries to define enlightenment. And there was one quote, enlightenment is a wave that realizes it is the ocean. Just really corny stuff like that. And I'm like, no, even Bruce Lee can come up with something way wiser than that. So I stopped reading Buddhist books because it doesn't quite make sense anymore to me. And I don't know. I still think, but besides that, I still think that religion is the root of all evil, and even Buddhism hasn't really lived up to its principles.
Well, he points out the wanting paradox, doesn't he, in Buddhism? Ligotti, he talks about there's a paradox, because Buddhism teaches you that in order to be happy, you need to stop wanting things. You need to just stop chasing goals, stop wanting things, and just be content as you are and where you are. But it's also true that most Buddhists want to gain enlightenment. So that's a want, isn't it? So it's like a wanting paradox. The impression I got in the book is that he puts down Christianity, Islam, and Buddhism. I don't think he's a fan of either one of them. That's the impression I got. I don't think he subscribes to any of them, and so
But
I
I
don't
think
either.
Buddhism is treated kindly in the book as compared to the other religions. Definitely.
Well, he probably favours it because of the pessimistic stance. And I mean, the whole beginning of the book is kind of talking about how pessimists never get the soapbox, because you know the general masses prefer, you know, living for a better tomorrow and all of this kind of stuff. And it is very true. I mean, if you spout any of the ideas that are in the book, you're not going to be invited to any parties anytime soon. It's not something most people want to hear. Which is, again, I mean, I think that's quite perverse of people in general, because it's a form of delusion in of itself, of like blocking out anything that you don't like to hear. But I find that that's becoming more and more the case, where, I mean, I'm under the theory these days that things like YouTube and Instagram and whatnot are basically turning everyone into NPCs, where people are going to start thinking in very robotic, non-player character types of ways just to avoid any type of conflict. And I think that's kind of maybe in Nietzsche's kind of last man kind of concept, where we'll all just be sloths on a beanbag having things dripped into us. I think that you got to want. I think for a lot of people that would be the perfect life. You just plug into some fantasy land where you can do whatever the hell you want, whilst having food tubed into you. Yeah.
Blue pill or the red pill? You know, which one would you choose?
Yeah, well, I think most people want they want the blue pill, really.
Yeah. I mean, this
But I
book
think
is definitely the red pill.
But he points out that people are looking forward to the future. I don't think that's, in a way, to borrow a concept of Mark Fisher. I think our future has kind of been denied to us. I don't think really many people today think of the future as being good and we're all gonna have like flying cars or whatever.
No, we just got fucking shitty Chat GPT and Uber Eats and algorithms.
Yeah, well,
that's our answer. And chatbots. The AI we have sucks. I think it's so bad. There's no way it should have been released into the general public's use. What? So any arsehole can just tell a chat thing, oh, make me an image of whatever, and then that makes them feel like they're an artist because they thought of something. But most of the things it comes out with is dog shit. I mean, I'm not saying it isn't amazing what it can do, because it is quite incredible, especially like the actual mechanics that go into making an iPhone or whatever. It's insane, really. It's an advanced computer in your pocket. That's all fine, but with the actual apps and whatnot and things that we can actually use it for, crap. In my
yeah, but it's kind of replacing labor in a way that can be catastrophic, and we don't have any other options. So, how are you going to get?
We never asked the question
like, anything else?
Should we actually put this into public use? Should this be available to the masses? Like, that's a question that should come up, but doesn't for some reason.
Yeah.
And now, even with something like movies, all of these streaming services, and you've got strikes going on in Hollywood, and if they can use extras with just AI, essentially, we don't seem to be that far off of just patenting actors of old, and we'll just see we'll probably be able to watch like Fight Club, but you could have Tom Hanks in it instead of Brad Pitt for a laugh, and you can just tell it to do that. But that would be potentially movies of the future. I think Harari mentions it in Homo Deus as well, where you can select, you could even tell AI, oh, I love, I don't know, a Celine Dion song, but I don't like this little lyric here. Can you change that? Or can you get this song by whoever, the Beatles, but make it be sung by Kurt Cobain instead? And it will be able to just... Yeah. It's crazy.
That
If it was
story
able
is
to
already
do
going
that.
on, really.
Yeah, it
Already
already is happening, but it's kind of like the first level. You know, it's like the very early stage,
Yeah.
the shit stage, essentially. Like as I like to think of it as.
Yeah, but
It's
I don't think
limited.
there will be a good stage ever.
No, neither do I.
Will
I don't
be
actually.
just
You've got to
shittier
wonder
stages.
if, like, the human, like when Ligotti talks about this whole, we're always thinking about a better tomorrow. What is that tomorrow then? Is that just becoming AI, like fully ingrained, so we can forget about all of our human proclivities and biological imperatives, and we can just put ourselves into a chip? Because it seems that way. It seems like
Yeah,
what we want to do
to
is
think of
become the gods that we used to
Mark
worship.
Fisher again.
Yeah.
Like there's no, not even a concept of what would the world be without all the shit we're living through. We can't even dream about a brand new good world anymore. There's not even hopes in our dreams. It's just like,
Sorry, I loved how grim that was as a sentence. There's not even hopes in our dreams.
yeah, but
That's beautiful. I actually didn't think it would be as depressing, this stream. That's how deluded I am.
I didn't think like the conspiracy against the human race stream would be depressing at all.
Could you introduce the participants, please, so we know a bit about their background? I did actually do that, Patrick, but I will again. James Flynn you're a horror author, right? James?
Horror and science fiction. Yes.
Nice.
Yes.
And yeah,
Got,
Paula,
got a
you
few
know, I think. Paula's an author as well of, what would you call your fiction? Existential? Philosophical?
Literary fiction.
Literary. Same.
Yeah.
That's what I claim. Literary erotica. And Bruno, how would you like to? Do you want to say something about yourself?
Yeah,
I'm a bit late in the
yeah.
day for this, but yeah, go for it.
I'm actually an AI programmer.
You're the enemy. You're the enemy.
It's all
Yeah, I'm the
your
enemy.
fault.
But I'm one of the good ones. I'm one of the good ones.
They all say that.
Yeah. No, but I work at. I'm a programmer. I work with machine learning, but hopefully, good ways. I work mainly with student dropout prediction in academic settings. So we're kind of trying to identify students that have problems with using AI, but then we can focus on having the staff of the university kind of help them through whatever kind of problems they're having, being academic, being financial, or mental, or whatever. So we're kind of trying to identify them and put them in groups, tutoring groups, and things like that. So it's kind of using the tools of AI of identifying patterns to
How does
help
that
them.
work? It sounds like a surveillance system.
It's really using the data that the university already has, the enrollment in classes, their frequency, their grades, things like familial background, their age, sex, things like that. We're trying to find some patterns and identify possibly students that may be having difficulties, so we can try and help them. it's not like a massive surveillance if we don't have like cameras in the classrooms or anything like that. But some people are doing that.
Not
So
yet.
Yeah.
I'm strongly against that. I think that's pretty immoral. Or some people in the field, they're putting cameras to see if you're concentrating, if you're paying attention to the teacher's explanation or anything. But I think that's a no-no, at least for me. But I have an engineering background as well, so kind of the whole physics thing is kind of inspired by lectures I had back in college in engineering. But yeah, that's what I focus on these days.
Nice. Oh, it sounds interesting, and hopefully it's
really
helpful to certain students and whatnot.
Yeah, we can use the same kind of pipeline to work in different applications as well, but I don't want to try to do anything as nefarious as we're seeing with other people in the field, because I think the methods, the techniques can be useful in other ways that contribute to human progress and to human development more than they can be harmful. Or as we in this hyper capitalist system that we all live in, concerns for privacy or for any kind of ethics is, we know it's in the bottom of the list, really.
Yeah, certainly so. So, do you regret reading the book, or are you happy you read the book? It's a question to all. So,
I actually regret reading it in a way.
Really?
It's hard to tell. It's hard to tell how much it affected me, because before reading the book, in 2020 I was in a good place, as I say. I've got a kind of naturally pessimistic streak. I've got that kind of mindset. It didn't really teach me that much that I didn't already know. It kind of just confirmed it. So it's hard to say exactly what it did to me, but it lingers, doesn't it? It lingers in the back of your mind, and it feels like you can't quite shake off these bloody ideas, and it just stays there, doesn't it? So at least some days I definitely regret reading it. Yes, I've read it 3 times now, and I think that's enough for me. I don't think I'm going to read it a 4th time. I think I'm going to put it down now for good.
You've read it three times in 3 years, then. That's quite a lot.
Yeah, 2020. I read it again in 2021, and then I put it down for 2 years.
So you left it
for
a couple of years.
I left it alone, and it was just sitting there like on my Kindle, like kind of like the Hellraiser box, like Clive Barker's box. I just didn't want to open it again because I knew these fucking demons were going to come back out and haunt me again. So I just kind of kept swiping past it. I thought, no, not today. Maybe next week. I'll read it again, but if not now. And I read it again a few weeks ago. I think that's enough for me. I don't think I need any of these ideas driven home any further. I think the job's done. I think you'll go back to it. Really?
I don't know. There is something very intoxicating about the piece. That, in that self-help way. Yeah, I don't think it's not gonna. It doesn't give you guidance, but it kind of strips you of all of your nonsense a bit. So in a way, I find it kind of stress relieving, because it kind of it reminds me like, oh yeah, I'm just a puppet There is no self. Just let me just get rid of. So in a weird way, it kind of gives me a sort of nihilistic positivity, because it kind of makes me think, oh yeah, all the stuff that I worry about day to day, it doesn't really make any difference whatsoever. So it's kind of in a kind of almost psychotic way, it's kind of like a positive thing. But yeah, there is that kind of other side of me of like, if I went down a certain different trajectory and I never touched this piece, and I just like the way some people do try to avoid anything negative and whatnot, maybe they know something I don't, you know. There is that wonder sometimes of like, is it better to do that? Would I have, I mean, I doubt it, because I can't relate outside of, you know, the things that I'm actually drawn to and whatnot, but yeah, you got to wonder, is this book just preaching to the choir of people like me, and that's why I hold it dear? I don't know.
Right. I mean, I feel as though I don't need to be reminded anymore of this stuff. I mean, I'm naturally inclined to do that anyway. If anything, I feel as though I need a little bit of delusion. Maybe I need to read maybe a book by Steven Pinker. Apparently he's got that book called Better Angels of Our Nature or something. I feel like I need to read that to kind of ease myself in this extreme pessimism from Mark.
Are there any other books that have had such an effect on you?
I read Better Never to Have Been by David Benatar. That was quite an experience. And that relates to a question I was going to ask everybody, actually. David Benatar, he's a professor from South Africa, and he not preaches, he goes on about antinatalism a lot, how it's kind of morally wrong to have children and people into the world. He believes that by chance. He actually tries to prove that it's morally wrong to kind of create life. He kind of tries to prove in an objective manner that consciousness is a bad thing. It's negative, not positive. I was going to ask you all, do you think it's objectively provable in the same way as like that this is a bad thing, like the parent of all horrors? Because some people would argue that consciousness is like a blessing. It's something we should celebrate. So, do you think it's provable one way or the other? I personally don't think it is. I think it's a matter of opinion. If one person says it's definitely a bad thing to be conscious, he would be right. If somebody else says this is a blessing, it's even if life is full of pain, you're still lucky to be conscious. That person would also be correct. I don't think it's provable in the same way that 2 plus 2 equals 4.
Whether
Does anybody
it's
else agree?
a gift or a curse, or that you can't.
Yeah, is
prove
it
either way.
provable one way or the other? Yeah.
I think it's kind of a non-starter again to contemplate, because we can only contemplate because we have it. It's kind of like the same thing with being alive or being non-alive, not even dead. It's not a good thing, nor a blessing, nor a curse. I think it's just the default state. I think sometimes us humans try to put a value system in most things when there is really none. It's just this. It's like is nature good or bad? Nature it doesn't follow that. It doesn't follow principles of goodness or badness or pleasant or unpleasantness. It just is. And I think talking about other books, In the Dust of This Planet, Eugene Tacker's In the Dust of This Planet, it really tries to exclude the human element, the human experience from reality, basically. I think the concept of the Earth itself, the Earth as without having a lens through human experience and through us like trying to understand it, just being there, just reality existing outside of us. I think consciousness is kind of like that. It's kind of the other, the something that we can't really judge it. It's like, is air good or bad? Is the sun good or bad? It doesn't fit into our neat little categories of things being good or being bad. It just is. It's like the classic, is a knife good or bad? It can be used to good, it can be used to bad, but it just is. It's basically it's above those little boxes, those concepts of goodness and badness.
Well, Benatar's argument basically rests upon pleasure versus pain. If you weigh it up, pleasure versus pain, every single human life is just bound to have more pain in it than pleasure. Even if you're born into some like rich family, like an aristocrat, or you're like an A-list celebrity, your life will still always have more pain than pleasure. So if you're thinking about things in those terms, you could argue that consciousness or just existing is and like a net negative thing. But somebody else would come along and say, well, there's more to life than just pleasure and pain. You've also got kind of meaning, or if you've got meaning. So that's a big
reducing
mark.
a bit.
Does Benatar actually specify what he means by pain, though? Because I would argue most of life is just boredom. It swings between, as that Schopenhauer quote, between pleasure and boredom, basically. Where you're just kind of waiting around. Like a lot of life is that. I mean, presuming you're not suffering from some sort of, very slow, I don't know, terminal illness or condition that makes your health pretty fucking shitty. So it's an actual physical pain that or even, something like ME, if you have that permanently, where you're chronically fatigued and whatnot. But then even the concept of pain, I mean, some people get off on that. So it's like the whole idea of getting a good spanking is someone's, one person's, celebration is another person's hell, that kind of thing. So I don't know, it gets a bit, like we have this tendency, I was actually going to mention it before, but this thing about splitting. It's a kind of thing that people do in infancy, actually. It's like, is this good? Is this bad? And I think we're in a very infantilized world now where we kind of can't help but split all the time. Good, bad, but, all the time. Because we're kind of bombarded with it constantly as well. It's like, oh, this thing is what's going to improve something. This is a negativity in my life. Hit the gym, bro. You got to work towards your goals and, like, don't listen to the, the losers or whatever. But it's all a crock, isn't it, really? It's like when life is so nuanced and most of life is grey, it's not really one thing or the other. And I just find it a curious thing that we have this, maybe it is from infancy, like good and evil and all that kind of stuff, so it stays with you, that kind of childhood grasp of things. But really you'd think we'd grow out of that and actually go beyond good and evil, dare I say, kind of thing. or at least aspire towards that. Whereas I don't know, sometimes I wonder whether we've kind of hit a plateau with it all, and now we're just kind of going, better to just say this thing's good, this thing's bad, whatever, you know.
An interesting point he makes is that pain is often long-lasting, whereas pleasure is often fleeting.
True.
If you laugh, when you laugh, you usually laugh for just a few seconds and then you stop, don't you? But if you've got like an injury, it's possible to be in pain for hours and hours, constantly, agony. But it's hard to think of an occasion where you're in a state of constant, prolonged pleasure. Most pleasures don't last that long, do they? They're quite fleeting. They last just a few seconds, but there are a lot of pains that do last a long time. So it's like an asymmetry between pleasure and pain.
Yeah, and I find that if you acknowledge that you're feeling pleasant, that usually extinguishes it. Like if you suddenly think,
right.
I'm having a great time, then it's kind of like, why am I having a great time? You start to question it, and then you're out of the moment. So it's usually only times when you're actually really in it with someone, because a lot of the other time you've got other things going on where your brain's thinking about what you need to do the next day or week, or how you didn't work out or whatever, you know, things like it will eat away at you a little bit. And even pleasurable things turn into nothing. I mean, you can overdose on dopamine easy, and I think a lot of people are now, because it's so easy to get a hit of it. All you have to do is open your phone for a few seconds, and then it's like boop, done, and then it's like turned into a transactional nothingness essentially, where any kind of hit is enough for that, basically just to kill boredom. Like I've seen people saying it now, like the people who invented the smartphones actually killed boredom, and it's like I mean, I totally disagree, but
Yeah.
I can kind of see where they're coming from, because it's a constant distraction essentially. What they really mean is like there's a 24/7 fucking fruit machine in your pocket where you can just load it up and be distracted for a little while, and you think you're getting pleasure out of it, but it's an empty, superficial one. It's a bit like meaningless sex in a sense, or at least too much of it, where anyone after a while just becomes as good as anyone else. It's just like it serves a function, but the function turns against itself. I don't know whether if you could actually access something that was like pleasurable to the same degree every time. Like I think they do experiments with rats where they give them like cocaine or whatever, and at some I think there's something where they got it part of their neurons, and they could just press this button.
Yeah.
And then
They
the
wire
rat pressed
the
it.
brains.
Yeah, so it literally felt pleasure every time, and it got so hooked on it that it stopped eating, stopped sleep. It would just be there 24/7, pushing that button. A bit like people with their phones, really. But it would do it so much until it died, essentially. So I suppose the argument is that displeasure and discomfort and pain, like it's a discomfort to feel hunger, but you need that, otherwise, you know, you won't get the pleasure of consuming, because you need to have that need essentially in the first place. So it's a kind of
it's like a yin yang thing.
yeah, exactly. It's like
I
I know what Benatar's saying when it's like, yeah, if you weigh the human life, and there is inevitably more suffering because you can't meet every need 24/7, and even then your own health will deteriorate, and you know, you're basically decaying from, I mean, you could argue from birth, but it's from about the age of 25 it starts to go downhill, and you don't rejuvenate as much, and you're a short history of decay, basically. Is that what was he describing? Human beings? I don't think he was probably describing history in general, but
yeah, I mean, you could make a very strong argument that life is like a downhill slope. But my general philosophy now is if you find yourself having been born, you might as well try to be happy. I mean, it's silly not to, really, isn't it? It's silly not to. You might as well just try. So
I don't even think
that's
like
that.
trying to be happy, but contentment. I think is a better way to put it, because like trying happiness, it kind of implies that you're always seeking pleasure, or always, oh, I want to be, as he said, I want to go to the gym, or whatever. Well, being content is like accepting this kind of concept of being okay, but like as you said before with what's the name of it? Stoicism. Yes, being kind of stoic to things, and just receive and process that experience. I think it's way more helpful than trying to, oh, I want to be happy. How are we going to be happy? Oh, I need a new car. I need a new wife, or a new apartment, or whatever. Or if you just accept the way you are and trying to not want to, not even not want to change it, but not wanting to be anything different than it is. I think that's, at least, is kind of my goal in living,
I think
and
one thing
trying
that
to make the best of it.
I agree with that for sure. But one thing that conspiracy taught me, I would say, is to change my perspective, I guess, because this whole nature of consciousness is a blunder. I mean, okay, fair enough, you might be right, but I would say it's probably an experiment gone wrong. And here are the consequences, It's just that not everything turns out right the first time, and maybe according to nature, there won't be a second time around. I mean, who knows? And that would be like Ligotti's happy ending.
Well, walk hand in hand into oblivion. That'd be the happy.
Yeah.
But that's what we're doing anyway. That's the thing. That's the only thing. There is a kind of paradox in his argument. What? Because it's running under the assumption that we're going to survive forever. We're not. Even if we did somehow survive the next 80 billion years, the sun's going to explode. Or as predictions go. I'm not quite sure how they can make that kind of prediction, to be honest. But, let's say it is correct. Yeah, without that, we're fucked. Unless we've somehow found another galaxy to set up camp or whatever. Or
Yeah, but
that
the
we've
universe-
evolved.
Even that
The
would work.
universe gonna
Instead, the
implode.
universe itself has a limited life expectancy, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I mean, or
but
even if we turned into, like, if we managed to become like the gods we used to worship, because I actually think that's the trajectory that human beings are trying to accomplish, where we turn ourselves into immortal beings, but they'd have to be pretty removed from our own nature, which will probably be our downfall, because I don't think it really can ever work like that. This is basically saying an
I don't think
inorganic
we'll get
entity.
that far, really.
Nah, it's
The whole
delusional to think
futurism,
that.
transhumanism thing.
Yeah.
I just find it very sad. I watched the Ray Kurzweil documentary a while back, and it's basically just him trying to recreate his father, computer or something. And it's really just a way of him coping with the loss of his childhood and his father. And it's because he's a bajillionaire or something, he can kind of indulge himself in his fantasy. But I think it's completely out of the possibility, even though we have like great achievements with artificial intelligence or whatever. But we don't even understand it, the brain in a in a basic level, at least we don't understand that. And even if we did, like recreating it and copying memories, it's something that it's really like it's completely science fiction in my opinion. We can't. We don't have bytes stored in
Yeah.
our brain. It's not like a computer. It's completely amalgamation of wiring and fluctuating waves. I don't think it can be replicated like that. And
Yeah, because everything is affected by everything
seeing the
else
world,
as well. Yeah.
yeah, and seeing the trajectory we're going now with global warming. I don't like the phrase climate change because it really undermines the whole thing. It's global warming and the whole destruction of nature. I don't think we will last that long to see like the future robots, cyborgs or whatever walking about, and Kurt's father like having a chat with him.
But before the world go extinct, do you guys think that, or what do you think about the idea of humanity reverting back? There was, I think there was like a page or two where Ligotti talked about atavism, and it was one of the topics that we talked about at university when we were reading science fiction. And one of the books we covered was H.G. Wells' Island of Dr. Moreau. I don't know if anyone has read it. It's just basically about this mad scientist that tortures animals and turns them into half humans. So yeah, you have like the themes of suffering and humans messing with the laws of nature. But do you think we're still evolving, or are we reverting back to an earlier evolutionary type?
I thought you were going to say reverting back to a world before technology. Then, but you mean actually changing our biology?
Yeah.
Is that what you mean? Right.
I think our
Yeah, pretty much.
psychology is changing. I'm not sure it's reverting, but I think if the more we indulge technological advancements, I mean, I think advancement's a bit of a misnomer personally, but technology in general, I think it does change the way people are interacting with the world. I get people sending me fucking reels all the time. It's like I don't want to see a reel. And I know this is a very anecdotal thing, but to me, it's like watching something for 10 seconds just to get a quick hit out of it is not how I want to consume entertainment, to be honest. And this is a weird example to give, maybe, but I think the more that is indulged and the less we're actually looking at each other face to face, the more you actually relate to the world through a screen. So it's already become more normalized. A lot of people sleep with their phone like right by them in bed. It's like a partner, like a new lover, essentially, or an additional lover. And yeah, I mean, I can't see that getting any better, let's say, in terms of like how we used to live. I think it will get worse. So I don't know whether we're reverting necessarily, or I do think but it's constantly adapting. Like we always talk about like how we utilize these advancements for us, but how they change us as well is just as a valid question, because I do think it does. I mean, it's interesting that we've adopted these things, and yet all of the research says that they actually make us far more miserable. We're worse off socially. Economically, we're far worse off, and really it's become like a comfort blanket because it's like the only thing that you can escape with, even though that very escapism is probably why, you know, you're mentally ill or whatever you want to call it. But
well, you could argue that technology is reducing our attention span, and
For sure.
I
For sure.
sometimes wonder whether in the ancient past, we got smarter because presumably the smartest humans survived. They avoided being eaten, and they went on to have babies. But in modern society, you don't have to be smart to reproduce anymore. Like, there's no. It's not a case of the brightest people reproducing the most, is it? So it makes me wonder: could in a few hundred years' time, well, longer than that, thousands of years, millions of years, could our intellect kind of revert back to cavemen days? could we go back to being less smart because there's no?
I think that's already happening. I think in the general masses. Just because, I mean, giving something like the internet to everyone has basically decimated all forms of media, because everyone has their access. You know, I don't watch the news or anything like that. I hear about things through feeds and whatnot. But really, if you look at what Google is and whatnot, it's like it's a very democratic thing. It's voted for, but it's not voted for consciously. It's voted for by clicks, and most people don't know their arsehole from their ear roll, so they click on the most entertaining, easily accessible, broken down, black and white thing that they can access, and that is essentially like a vote. So that brings it to the top of the page. So the morons are rising up. I mean, they're already everywhere. If you look at the consensus of like everyone's equal, how are they equal? And I can't even question that as a person nowadays. It's just a consensus that this egalitarian joke, I would say, when it's totally fine that the fact that we're not equal, because some people are better at physical things than they are intellectual, and vice versa. Like, it's obvious. It seems like a obvious thing to say, but that's not the kind of realm we're in. And that's the thing. That's the your truth is just as good as my truth. What truth? As if like truth is some sort of subjective thing. It's absurd. Can you imagine any scientific doctrine running on that kind of consensus? Mm-hmm. It wouldn't work. It's just, that's as good as like believing in like, I don't know, putting all those fucking things, leeches on your skin, like, is a good cure for acne or whatever. And it's like, well, if it worked for one person, that's enough proof, kind of thing. And that's what you see everywhere online. It's like people flogging products that are all made in places you couldn't even guess, usually China, but it could be coming from anywhere. And the things that they film are fake, like they're filtered and things like that. Like, it's all pretty dystopian, really. I think it's just, it's easy to not see it when you're in it, I suppose. Similar to what Mark Fisher says, it's like you're kind of caught in this, I don't know, post-world where we've got the values of the 21st century, or the 20th century rather, late 20th century, and yet we're supposed to be in this new world, and yet nothing in it's new. It's just all remakes, and there hasn't really been a new invention for about 30 years, really.
I think it's just like changing one mechanism of control for another. I don't think that the news will, like, strictly speaking, like the accurate telling of events.
Oh, no, I wasn't meaning to imply that. I just mean in terms of like an established hierarchy of things. Like, these things don't exist anymore. Like, they used to have newspapers and whatnot as at least a form of an established order. Same with institutions is what I mean. So say the education system, it was institutional. But really, this is all gone because, the internet's basically destroyed it. Pretty much.
There is a professor out there though who he was called James Flynn, funnily enough. This is how I know about him. He's, according to this professor, the national, or even might even be the global IQ is on the rise, and it's been on the rise since like the 1950s. Of course, when you do an IQ test, the average score is 100, isn't it? That's what the average person on the street would get, 100. But as the decades have gone on, that average score of 100 means a higher standard than it did back in 1950. If you score 100 today, you're smarter than somebody who scored 100 back in 1950. So, according to the data, the average IQ has gone up. So who knows? When I see people glued to their phones every day, I do often wonder about the IQ and the attention span of the average person and the effects that it's
But
having.
is IQ a good metric? Anyway,
Well, it's one metric, isn't it? Yeah. There's also emotional intelligence.
Yeah, but people's like. It could still be on the rise, and yet people could be dumber than ever at the same time. It just depends on what demographics being monitored. So you can still have people getting more intelligent because the ones who wouldn't have had access to it in the past now have it, so that's increasing. But because the only people breeding are the monkeys, let's say, they're all expanding in terms of proportion, and they can barely string a sentence together, let alone read a book. So, yeah, overall, it's like I think I don't know, it's weird, isn't it? Because we've all got these insanely advanced devices, and yet it's like handing it to people who still live in caves a lot of the time. It's like, what do you think is going to happen with that? Because it gives people the illusion of having knowledge, because they can just search for things on Wikipedia and pretend that they know what they're talking about. It gives a very bizarre kind of pretend knowledge. I mean, I saw it with there's some weird kid who like rips into these OnlyFans girls. You might have seen him around. He's really young, and he starts questioning one of them about how many books she's read, or just name 5 books, and she can't do it. She can't even think of 5 films that were books, And but her first reaction is to hold her phone and be like, "Well, I'll just Google it," kind of thing. It's like as if like that's part of her mind, like it's like
an extra brain in your pocket.
Yeah. And somehow that means that she knows or is aware of something that she clearly isn't. It's just that she has an access to it, and that gives enough of an illusion to think that you've got knowledge when it's clearly like you don't have any. And in fact, you probably don't even have the impetus to garner that knowledge, because if you know that you can just Google anything. I mean, I think we're all slightly guilty of that. I used to know people's phone numbers by heart because you'd have to memorize it in times past. Nowadays, you don't. You barely even have to remember your own number. You can just look it up every time you need it, Even other things like navigation, you don't need to learn that anymore. You've got a sat-nav. So it's like everything's kind of catered.
You don't memorise the route. You don't pay any attention. You just follow the screen, and then the next day when you don't have your sat nav, you're lost because you can't remember the route. It's
like, never mind confusing the map for the territory. It's like you're just glued to your phone anyway, so it doesn't make any difference.
Right.
Sorry. This has been a nice way to be as pessimistic as I can go.
It's been a nice pessimistic chat. I might actually have to end it here. It's very late where I am.
We've been going for a couple of hours, so I think it would be a good time to close it, unless anyone has any concluding thoughts that they'd like to. Now's your moment.
Thoughts from me is don't read the book, burn it. If you find it in a bookshop, either rip it up burn it or throw it in the bin and just walk away. That's my closing advice.
Thing is that ironically that would make me want to buy it. That's the thing. That's the kind of like
That's a good
if I saw
That's
that on a
advert.
poster or whatever, I'd be like, oh, what's this uncovered gem? Like,
Yeah, right.
Should I wait at least a year before I reread it, or how? What was the second read like for you guys?
The second read for me was similar to the first. So and then the third one was a little bit more manageable. So it kind of got a bit easier each time for me.
it depends. I mean, I've always really, I love the book, if I'm honest. I mean, I can nitpick at some of the elements of it of like, yeah, okay, it doesn't say offer many solutions or whatever, but I kind of like the honesty of it not pretending that it could, because I think where it stands out in that regard is like it doesn't even pretend that it's going to do that. And in a weird way, it's a kind of miracle that it was ever published, because it's like it's surprising. I mean, I think it's only through word of mouth and kind of a cult status that has made it what it is today, because it certainly couldn't have been marketing. I mean, I don't know how you would market this kind of book. It's like, thought you were human? Think again. You're a fucking puppet. You know, it's that kind of thing. It's like, and maybe Ligotti's name as a fiction author helped a little bit, because he did gain some cult status, I think, before this was released. But I don't know. I mean, it was, for me, it wasn't even like, I didn't think, oh, I want to read that again. I just kept going back to it, and I found like anytime I picked it up, I would genuinely read most of it. And the only part I kind of would skim over was probably the ego death stuff, because I found that to be a bit more like, well, dull maybe compared to that. I still think it's interesting, but because it's always something where it just happened and I'm supposed to go on someone's word that they were suddenly experiencing life, you know, not having any semblance of a self and all that. It's like, yeah, it sounds good, but I don't, unless I've got some ayahuasca to like take with me as I'm reading to try and relate, I don't really get too much from that. And yeah, I mean, the books it mentions are all really worth checking out as well. The Tenant, The Last Messiah, They Shoot Horses, Don't They? There's a few I've yet to pick up still, and The Philosophers and whatnot. So yeah, I'd say you probably will reread it, but how long you should wait, up to you. I mean, if some shitty stuff happens in your life, you know, death of a loved one or whatever, it's not exactly the book I'd recommend picking up. But
yeah, but on the other hand, if you're going through a good stage, is it a good idea to read it? Because you don't want to bring yourself down, do you?
True.
So
if you don't want to get too cocky in how good you're feeling, maybe this would be a good equalizer of like, things are going a little bit too well, better bring myself back down, just in case
get down
life
off
goes
your high
south.
horse. So
A little bit. Kick myself in the balls.
Yeah.
Just you know.
Yeah, I still find it strange how you.
Good day. Yeah.
I still find it strange how you guys approach this book as a self-help book, because to me, I would call it a subjective essay that analyzes or interprets other philosophers' worldview, like going into depth about how they portray the true face of the world, how they help us understand and explain that we're here for a reason or no reason or whatever. But yeah, to me it's more like, it reads like an essay, so I couldn't approach it as a self-help book.
Yeah.
No,
It's not called
it's a
Seven.
valid point.
Yeah, because it's not called 7 Effective Ways of Leading a Miserable Life, right?
Yeah, for me, I think it was a net positive. You know, if you think on those terms, but I think it's really the honesty of it that really kind of amazed me. It's really the unfiltered rawness of it all, of life, without any
I think
any
one of
cream
the
or cherry on top, anything else.
just to like slightly expand on what you're saying is it kind of does read like a scrapbook of a madman in a diary form that
Yeah.
is quite essayist, and yet somehow he's managed to make it in a thing that flows throughout, which I think is probably a testament to what I think is so good about the piece, because he has this kind of standpoint about being a pessimist and how that makes you an outsider, and then that outsider kind of outlook gives you certain insights into the cosmological or the supernatural, and kind of how that just blends in. And then he puts in the stuff about ego death, and it yeah, it's like like an expanding web that somehow has threads throughout it where you don't expect them to be, and yet it's still kind of opinion based in quite a lot of regards. So it's kind of like stumbling upon someone's lunatic diary, and yet everything somehow makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's kind of it's
I thought it was like very well written. It's technically like some of the phrasing in here is pretty
Yeah, it's great.
genius, and the amount
Great
of
phrasing.
research is always also amazing. You see, he cites basically everything under the sun, and he paints, as you said, a really broad picture of it all. And it's like I'm a bit envious of the book, like to see like such a consistent work. I think it would, if I wrote it, would be like one of my greatest accomplishments. I think so. In that way, seen as a work of art, I think it's amazing, and it didn't really like open the curtain of a secret knowledge to me, but it put everything in a concise manner, kind of like everything that, as James said, that you're feeling. You know, life is not flowers and sunshine, but it really like compacts everything in a single volume. And for me, I had fun with it, and I saw the humor in it as well. And I'm not inclined to read it again right now, but most definitely in the future I will revisit it. And that's it.
Cool. All right, well, let's leave it there. Thank you very much for joining me. Hopefully we can do this
Thank
again
you very much.
at some time in the future.
Thank you.
Yeah, in the future, in the next few streams or whatever, probably we'll be looking more at films, maybe books as well. But I like the idea of discussing, maybe a few movies and just seeing, just seeing where the general conversation goes. Maybe philosophical stuff, whatever, really. And yeah, if you do want to get in touch to be on the show, just let me know. And there's no real criteria, so yeah, let's just leave it there. Thank you very much for all joining. Enjoy your morning and evening and afternoon.
Okay, thank you. Nice
Thanks
to meet
for
you
having
all.
me.
Take care.
Nice
Thank
to
you.
meet you.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.